Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to another Late Talk live event. It's been a while since I've done one of these. Looking back on the schedule, I've been busy with the show season, speaking all over North America, and finally got a chance to sit down and speak to somebody who I've really wanted to have on the broadcast for a while. His name is Lindsay Simpson. He's a fellow YouTuber like myself, very active. If you're not following this channel, you should, especially if you want to learn more about stillwater fishing. Lindsay's based in England, just southeast of London. I've been a big fan of following the UK scene, particularly since about 1997. The World Championships were held in Kamloops, and being on our home turf, we thought we would do rather well, but we're not familiar with the whole competition scene and loch styling and that type of stillwater presentations. And it was quite a humbling experience. So I've been a huge student of the methods over there, the fly patterns, the techniques, the approach to stillwater fishing, because it's a little different than ours. We tend to do a lot more anchoring over here, but there are times that loch style and then fishing from the bank, which we'll touch on as well, is such a really good way to fly fish a lake. And I think it's always good to learn as many different techniques and tricks that you can to get the most out of your on the water experience. So again, we're going to talk with Lindsay about competitions a little bit and how that influences his fishing and how it influences our fishing as a whole, because many of the techniques we get to have the benefit of today, such as European nymphing, for example, all came out of competition. So interesting how they can help us when we're just fishing recreationally. So I'll bring Lindsay in and we'll welcome him. And here we go. Welcome, Lindsay. Thanks for
Hi,
joining me.
Phil. How are you doing?
Good. What time is it there?
It's just a minute past 6.
Yeah, so that's why we're on a Saturday here.
Lad.
Yeah, because I think Lindsay and I were talking. If I had him on at my usual 7 p.m. Pacific, that's 2 in the morning. And I don't think, Lindsay, you need our beauty sleep, right, my friend?
10 o'clock at night, I'm in my bed. I'm early to bed, early to rise. So this time suits me just grand.
So you've got a YouTube channel. Why don't you tell viewers on my channel? I'm sure you've got hopefully some people from your side of the pond are watching as well. But for those of you who aren't familiar, tell us a little bit about yourself, your life so far, your fishing.
I started fishing while I was serving in the army. So I did a little bit, as I think most anglers, they start off as kids with the pole and the net, fishing for minnows and bits and bobs. I started with that, but obviously I grew up, got more interested in whiskey and women. So that kind of went aside. But then as I was getting a little bit older, a friend of mine introduced me to fly fishing, and I've never really looked back. And he was a competition angler. He was in the British Army fishing team, and he kind of sucked me into that side of it. Mm-hmm. So competition fishing revolved around loch styles. So I fished a lot at the big reservoirs initially, and from there I found a love for all kinds of fly fishing. So rivers, still waters. If you can catch the fish with a fly, I'm all for it.
Yeah, it sounds familiar. I was born in England as well, in Liverpool. So I immigrated when I was 7, but my first experiences were going down to Sefton Park and fishing for coarse fish. Thankfully, my parents would let me go with the neighbor's kid and go down and fish, and fishing for brooch and ream and tench and all kinds of fish we don't see over here in North America. And of course, the carp was the prize catch if you could get one of those. But fly fishing, especially over here, they're kind of shunned on a little bit. But boy, they're a lot of fun if you get a carp on the fly.
I tried carp last year, actually. We have, it's a lot different in the UK. We have stock fisheries. Yeah. And a friend of mine took me to a carp lake, and they're not used to seeing fly fishermen. And it's so easy to target them in the summer because they come to the surface to feed, and all you need is a kind of deer hair. I used deer hair, burnt it down to a small ball, and they were suckers for that, because all the actual carp fishermen are firing hundreds of these pellets into the water. Did get you, so it was okay. They're powerful fish, but it's not the same explosive fight as a trout or a pike even,
Yeah, we'll have to have somebody on there, because it's popular over here in many of especially in the States, catching woolly buggers, crayfish patterns, more imitative techniques. But you're right, trout they're still near and dear to my heart. So you mentioned competitions, and over here in North America, there is definitely more competitions than you saw years ago. And and I'm not sure if it's the same over in your neck of the woods, but people sometimes frown on competitions and say it's, that's why they go fishing. But again, as I touched on in the intro, so many of the techniques come from competition fishing. So many of the improvements in our kit and our equipment. The one I use all the time is European nymphing, which is incredibly popular over here. That's all a result of competition and sort of the rules and how you have to fish. And that also dovetails in with our Stillwater fishing is, of course, loch style. So
Yeah.
why don't you talk on competitions? Because I know you're obviously you enjoy the benefit. And I didn't find it, the competitions I've been in, I didn't find it, cutthroat and all that stuff. There's just really good camaraderie. No. Pardon?
It can be cutthroat.
Oh, I'm sure it can, because any competition.
Competition fishing, and I get this a lot, actually. I go fishing to relax, and I've just seen Bob Bell. I know him really well. Hiya, Bob. I go fishing to relax. I don't want to competition fish. But here's the stark truth of it. The way angling progresses, certainly fly fishing, it's all through competition. If you're sitting at the back of the room thinking with your double tapered 4-way and the rod you're using, the reel you're using, it's all been developed from the competition scene. I can absolutely guarantee you that. It's not done any other way. It's competition drives the sport forward.
Yeah.
Not only that, the other thing I would say, and I know this through first-hand experience, if you want to get good at any of the disciplines, go do competition fishing, because you will get, it's like free lessons. Yeah. Certainly in this country, from loch style perspective, sometimes you'll get in the boat, and over the years I've shared the boat with national champions, brown bowl winners, world champions even. You can buy them lessons, but it's going to cost you an awful lot of money.
Yeah.
But if you enter competitions, you're getting all that for free.
Yeah.
Well, free. Competition fishing is not a cheap affair.
No, that's why I was fortunate enough in 2007 to participate in the Canadian Championships. It was on the gold medal team, and I haven't competed much after that because we just don't have at that time. There's more so now, but we didn't have a lot of the competitions set up. As you know, our country's kind of massive, so the ability to get from one venue to another was quite an issue, and it's all self-funded. So it's a little hard on the pocketbook. So if you were going to go fishing, you just went. But I've been a huge when we're going to talk about loch style, but I just, it's become every year more and more important part of my presentation techniques, and it's such fun. But you also compete on rivers and streams too. I know I've seen your, I follow your videos. I subscribe. So every time you put something up, it pops up, and I look forward to watching it. You've done that grayling competition. Tell me a little bit about that. That looked a lot of fun.
I used to compete all the time. Actually, that's all I did. But once I started doing, well, not even before I started doing YouTube, I kind of took a step back from it because, as I said, it's very expensive. It's very time consuming, and it was starting to take up all my life. Now YouTube's taking up all my life, but you know what I mean. I kind of it was costing me more money than I could afford. I couldn't really justify the time. I've got a wife and children. They were sick of the sight of me going away, so I've kind of stepped back. But when I was doing it, I loved it, absolutely loved it. And the loch styling, I worked my way up to getting into the international team a few times. The England international team, which obviously didn't.
Oh, that must have gone well with the home crowd.
To get into the Scotland team, I would have to commute to Scotland umpteen times to do the qualifiers and the process to get to the final, and then eventually get into the Scottish team. So I ended up fishing for England, and I ended up doing it 2 or 3 times. But they changed the way that qualification went. So what happened, and it was, for my money, it was a revenue generating venture. They started to allow you to enter as many qualifiers as you could pay for, and it just seemed to me that you were basically buying your way into the team, or you still had to qualify and get in the team, but that was kind of it for me once they started doing that multiple qualifier thing. I always wanted to have a rivers cap, so I got into the rivers and I think I'd done 6 national finals, but I just wasn't good enough is the bottom line. The guys that we've got in this country at the high end of river angling are really, really at the high end of river angling. You know, we've got Howard Croston, John
Yeah, that's
Tyler.
the one. That's who I met. Howard. He was over here last year speaking at some of the shows I was presenting at as well, and it was just, I got a chance
just a completely different level, Phil. You know, and I was nowhere near that level. I was an enthusiastic competitor, but not good enough to be cracking the team. But what it did do, so I've only been river fishing since I was 40-year-old, so 17 years for the rivers. And I would say now I'm happy to go to any river, anywhere, and hold my own, you know. And that's only because I've fished lots of different rivers around the world, and I've had the benefit of watching the likes of Howard fishing. You know, I've watched Howard a few times, controlling him at various venues. So what I still do is the grayling competitions, and the reason for that is competition fishing either brings out the very best in people or the very worst.
Yeah,
and that's just the truth. I mean, I've seen a thing with the bass fishing with guys stuffing weights down fish's throats and stuff. And we've had that fiasco with various people being accused of cheating and stuff, and it's not nice. But on the other hand, some of the guys I've met while competing have become friends for life, you know. I speak to them often, we go fishing together. So I think the benefits far outweigh the negativity of it.
Yeah. Well, there's your friend Bob agreeing with you wholeheartedly. So let's talk about loch styling, because again, I had Todd Oshie. I don't know if you ever met Todd, but Todd was he's a competitive Canadian fly fisher, has had the benefit of being able to travel the world and fish in the Commonwealth and the World Championships.
I've watched his new home, Phil. It looks amazing on Facebook.
Yeah. So, but let's talk about it a little bit, because maybe a lot of our listeners, again, when we talked, Lindsay and I talked before we came on, and just, a lot of our, particularly in Western Canada, Western United States, there's a lot of, people like to anchor. It's an effective method, but it's not the only way you can fish a lake. And there's times that, loch styling is the better option. And I know over where you fish, Lindsay, loch styling is, pretty well, the dominant method, isn't it? And what's some of the benefits? What do you feel that's so important that people learn this technique?
Yeah, well, loch styling, I mean, if you're anchored up, regardless of how far you can cast, you can only fish a certain amount of water. You're anchored. If you're not moving, once you've covered that water, unless every time you fan cast, so you cast out to the side and you work the water in front of you, if you're going and lifting your anchor to drift down 20 feet or so, and then dropping it again, which I don't see the point of, you're only fishing a limited amount of water. Now, if there's no fish there, and that's very possible, you're not going to catch any fish. So the benefits of loch style fishing is every time you cast, you're working the whole lake. So you're going to have a chance at catching fish. Now, once you've located a big shoal of fish, I've got I don't do it myself. I'm happy to go around and redrift, but some people will just drop the anchor and then they'll fish at anchor for the shoal of fish that they've found on the drift. Does that make sense, Phil?
Yeah, because that's, I put this slide up, some bullets we talked about before going live. And for me, it's just the ability to cover water. And the two things to me about anchoring and loch styling, your boat's under control. So you're not fighting and messing with your boat. It's not spinning around aimlessly. It's not. And of course, if you're busy focused on your boat and dealing with that and it's fighting you, you're not fishing. You're not being as effective as you can be. So once we deploy the Drogue, and we'll talk about that in a second, we'll talk about the different styles, you've got control and you can focus on your fishing. Because here, a lot of people want to cover water. They tend to troll at times. And to me, trolling is you drive over the fish first and your flies follow. And I think one of the most important keys you touched on there is the fly is always ahead of you. So the fish see that first. They don't spook. And you get a better opportunity to catch them.
Yeah, it's a bone of contention, actually. So on our reservoirs, there a lot of the guys that go out and they don't quite understand what a drifting boat means, and
Mm-hmm.
they'll see you catching fish, they'll motor over and they'll drop their anchor and
Yeah.
think there's not a problem because we've moved round to redrift. But then when you come to redrift, suddenly there's an anchored boat in front of you.
Yeah. Yeah,
There's
that's where.
some lively exchanges go on, you know.
Yeah,
You
we
can
have
imagine.
that sometimes because
Uh,
if fish are we're chironomid fishing in the spring, common technique is to anchor up and fish that shoal, and it certainly works very very well. Hopefully, you can come over and do that with me one day.
yeah,
And the two methods, you sitting in the middle of anchored in the middle of someone's drift doesn't go over well, or vice versa. You drifting through a bunch of boats that are anchored. The two methods don't often.
no,
Like you
they
says, it
don't go
gets
down well.
colorful, but.
Well,
But
we've also got people windsurfing, sailors,
yeah.
and
Well, we've got
sailboat.
that too. We got water skiers, jet
Yeah,
skis, all manner of things. But
you just got to try and use your common sense,
yeah,
and as I've got older, I've got a lot more polite.
yeah,
I'm glad to say I've mellowed it with age, and
yeah,
I'm not so much. I just shrug my shoulders, go and find some more fish elsewhere. That's
yeah, yeah,
the way to
yeah,
do it, I suppose.
yeah. There's lots of water, and
Yeah,
hopefully the fish aren't all in that one spot. We also do it a lot. I like to do it when I go fish in the eastern part of North America. The lakes there are different. They're quite deep. So anchoring, and sometimes we're over 80 feet of water. Now the fish aren't 80 feet down; they're suspended. They're 10 feet down, 12 feet down, 50, whatever. And lock
yeah,
styling is really the only way to fish that water effectively because you just can't. Who's carrying 150 feet of anchor rope or 100 feet of anchor rope to
yeah.
anchor down? Right? It's just it's a pain in the ass to
Well,
have.
what will happen on them deeper lakes? The fish will be sitting in a thermocline
Yeah,
where they find themselves either most comfortable when
yeah,
it's hot, or they'll be in the depth of water where the food is. So if they're feeding on Daphnia,
yeah,
and it's a bright day, the Daphnia will come to the surface. The fish will be not far behind them.
yeah,
Fish will be where the food source is. That's just common
yeah.
sense, I think.
Yeah, yeah. So again, the slide here showing when to lock style. I think we're both in agree. Anytime is a great time to lock style.
Yeah.
So,
Well,
so
I hardly ever anchor. I think I can, in the 35 years I've been fishing, I think I can count on both my hands how many times I've dropped the anchor, and it's
yeah,
usually at lunch.
it's funny because it's kind of the opposite here. But more and more people are discovering the charms of lock style, and of course, the big thing that everybody walks about is we use the term drogue, and what is a
Yeah,
drogue? I always say it's like a big. Imagine an underwater parachute that slows and controls your drift. Right? Would you
yeah.
say that's a fair assessment?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah,
It slows the drift so that you can control your fly line. Now, I don't know in your country how many lines you carry, but it's not uncommon for anglers to have 25, 30 lines, competition anglers.
yeah.
In
I'm a
the
little bit of a line junkie.
and they'll go from anywhere from 1 inch per second to DI9. I think I've
Yeah,
got DI9 in my box now, which is 9 inches per second. Now, lock styling, there's a lot more to work out than when you're anchored because you're calculating the depth through the sink rate
mm-hmm.
and the speed that the boat's drifting. Now, if you're not using a drogue, then you're not going to be counting down very far before you're over your line, and that's frowned upon in this country if you're fishing behind the boat.
Yeah.
In
Well, it's
certain
also
locations.
practical as the drogue and everything back there too, right? It's just
Yeah,
it's a recipe for a disaster sometimes if you hook a nice fish and it gets all wrapped up in the drogue ropes.
it happens, but you're going to lose fish. I mean,
Yeah,
if you fish long enough, you might have hooked 20 fish and only landed 8. That's
yeah,
just some days are like that, and
yeah,
some days they get wrapped in the drogue. Other
yeah,
days, getting wrapped in the drogue saves the day, and
yeah.
you get the
Yeah, we
fish.
have the same too. If you're fishing anchored, they go around the anchor rope and you learn to deal with it.
Yeah.
So
What I would
I
say
thought,
though, Bill, the image you had up there,
yeah, yeah.
I take my hat off to you because I think using a drogue with that kind of boat is very, very brave. In
Well,
a
you
big
know what?
wind, I think you could end up
Well,
sinking.
well, this boat is. Let me see if I can get it back in the screen again. Um, is it? This boat is 14 feet long and incredibly wide, so it
Yeah,
actually drifts very well.
But
Like
is
a
it
lot of
flat
times,
bottom?
yeah, flat bottomed, it
Yeah.
offers a lot of surface area, so it'll bite. And I've had on a light wind day, I don't even need to use a drogue because the bow will stop. It'll actually behave quite well. I was quite surprised
Yeah,
because I
in
know the boat.
Ireland, it's common practice. They don't bother with drogues really,
Yeah,
and they
but
shoot across the
your
water.
boats are a different style, aren't they? They are
Yeah,
more that I'll say that
clinks,
clink
clink,
style. So
clink
they're
out.
heavy. They bite into the water. We don't. Aluminum boats are very popular here because they're the most inexpensive option. They're
Yeah,
lightweight. So yeah, there's some boats obviously drift better than others. But I'll show in a slide in a sec. We even drift with our pontoon boats on smaller
yeah,
lakes. It's impractical to get a boat in, or you don't own a boat because
yeah.
you have the benefit. I think it's important for our American and Canadian viewers that your fisheries are different, and you don't own boats. You go to a fishery, you pay to get in that fishery, and that includes your boat. Correct?
Yeah, you can hire
Yeah,
a boat or you
yeah,
can just buy a fish ticket and fish from the bank. But
yeah,
generally, if I'm going to a big reservoir, I want to have a boat because you can just
yeah,
get around a lot easier,
yeah,
Uh, and I'm
yeah.
not getting any younger walking around the bank.
Yeah. Clint here, a friend of mine, lives in British Columbia, but he's a competitive angler like yourself and me a few years back. Was Patterson Lake's located in Manitoba, a very shallow lake
Yeah,
overall. And of course, when that water gets rolling in the wind, it can be lethal out there. And, if
yeah.
you're out there when you probably shouldn't be, it's just fishing. You don't want to put yourself in a
Yeah.
situation you're going to get.
Well, I had a few friends from the army that had sent a team over to your championships,
Yeah.
and the one thing they said when they came back was that the boats were horrific,
Yeah.
and when the wind got up, it was quite hairy.
Yeah. Yeah. I had one of the competitions I had was a little tin boat with oars that were more like wooden spoons. They were useless, trying to row out there. It took me forever. And I had a big chap with me who was, I'm not exactly small now. I'd like to be smaller, but not. And he was a large lad. And boy, I just about was exhausted before because I had to fight the wind to get all the way up, to get my drift set up. And I was like, I'm done. So, yeah. So Jeff Rowley here, no relation, but Jeff's a fellow fly. I met Jeff in Denver this year at the fly fishing show there. Shared a few ale with him. And
Yeah.
is a drogue the same as a drift rock? It is. We'll show that in a second because I'll put this back in. So we're going to talk
Uh,
about that a little
I
bit.
would say it's a poor man's drogue.
Yeah, we'll go through that. Although I use it pontoon boat fishing, but yeah, I much prefer the paradrogue. This is a video Lindsay provided that just to show. Excellent shot here, Lindsay. How it sets up, and you can see the style of boats that you're. How long is that boat?
So it's about 14 feet,
Yeah,
I would guess. Clink style they're called, and it's not clink. It's made out of fiberglass, but it's in the
yeah,
clink style.
yeah. Because they
Um,
used to be wooden boats back in the day, didn't they?
well, we still have them on
Yeah,
places like Loch and up in Scotland more so,
yeah,
I would say. But up until recently, Buell used to have the old clink hammer style boats, and Chew Valley, places like that, still had the old
yeah,
wooden boats. They're
yeah,
solid.
yeah. Yeah, so you can see here again. We'll talk about deployment tactics, but there's the drogue out
Yeah.
behind with the rope. So this
What
is a
folk might notice, Phil, is there's a rope connecting the two strands
yeah,
to the drogue. Now that rope is free running, and I've got a center mark on that rope, so I can
okay.
actually steer the boat to
Yeah, because
certain
you can
spots of
shorten
the
the you by adjusting the length of the ropes, you can get that boat to crab on an
Yeah,
angle. So if
yeah,
you want to work along, let's say you're over a deeper stretch of water, but you see fish moving on a shoal, you can turn the boat in such a way both anglers can have a shot at it. Is
yeah.
that,
Well,
yeah,
the idea when you're loch style fishing, what should be happening is when both anglers cast and you're drifting forward,
yeah,
the line should remain straight in front of you.
yeah,
Yeah, so that's what it should be.
yeah,
Now, the more able competition anglers will set the boat so that they've got the line will slightly bend out to their side of the boat,
okay,
and there's an
yeah,
advantage to that. So,
okay,
if you're on the engine,
yeah,
generally the guy on the point is doing the drogue work,
yeah,
but some of the top guys they'll do the engine and they'll do the drogue. so that they can control the drift.
Yeah.
And I've seen that used to great effect in competition, because when you get that bend in your line, you're presenting your flies in a completely different way than is possible when you've got your line straight out the front
down.
of the boat.
Yeah. So
you're fishing the angle. It's not very fair on the guy on the other end of the boat, because he finds himself fishing inside of the boat. And as you're retrieving, there's a technique that we use a lot here called, sorry, that's my family.
I thought it was mine.
There's a technique we use here in the UK called the hang. So you can imagine if the guy's got that line bending out on the engine, for example, he's hanging his flies well away from the boat. Whereas the guy on the point, if the drogue's not set right, he's hanging his flies in front of the boat. And as soon as the fish come up, you see the boat, they're gone. You know? And if you're not wise to that, you can be caught out.
Maybe we can touch on the hang a bit, because I'm a huge advocate of it. And I think people people always ask if they want to improve their catch rate. I said, fish the hang. You'll get 20-30% more fish, because they love to follow. And then you go to pick that line up, and that fly changes speed and direction. And that, I always say, sometimes that snaps the kill switch. All of a sudden, what they're interested in is moving away, and they'll take it. And if you pull the fly out of the water to cast again, you'll miss those fish.
Phil, it's a conscious decision. And you've got to be disciplined with it, because the one time you don't do it is when you get the big swirl and you go, I've hung all day. The first time I've not done it, it's like they know. So what I do, the way I do the hang, and you'll know if it's working on the day, you'll know after a few times. But I've got my lines marked.
Yeah, we do too.
All my sinking fly lines, and most people that I know will mark them at 20 feet. So when the marker gets to the tip of the rod ring, they know they've got 20 feet of line out, and they'll stop and hang. Then they'll retrieve until the marker's in their hand. They know they've got 10 foot out. And then they'll retrieve the last bit and rise up with their hands, rise up the flies, and then they'll recast. Because they're pretty sure that there's nothing there. What I do is I have my marker at 15 feet. So I know it's at the tip, blah, blah, blah. But I know when the marker's in my hand, I've got 5 feet of line. And what I do is I drop my rod tip to the water. And I count to 5. Sometimes 10, depending on how they want it. But the advantage of that is if I do get a take,'ve got somewhere to go. Do you understand what I mean? So you're when you get to your mark, you're rising your rod up, and you're up here, and you get a take.
You've got nowhere. That's interesting. I'll have to give that a try, because that's interesting. I've got a question here from Darren, and I just want to bring it up because I'm not sure what he means. Is there one style or the other that you prefer, and why? Darren, can you give me us a little bit of style as far as anchoring or lock style, or a type of drogue, and we can
Phil, I can answer that question. Darren, I prefer the method that's catching fish.
I'm the same. I'm the same way.
And I will go through every method until I find the one that's working. That's
that's I know some anglers that I call like a one-trick pony, that they do the one thing, and if it works, that's great. But if it's not, they're not. They're missing out on other methods that they should learn. I always say that some days you're having a great day and you're catching fish, and maybe that's the day you put that method away and try something you're not comfortable with or unfamiliar, or you saw, and because the fish are they're in the mood to play, so you can work that out. The next day you're having a day that you got to really, a term I use, bump and grind. You really got to work for it. The method works, so you're not stuck and go, well, I've never done this before, and I don't know whether it's the fish are off, or I'm not doing this right, or whatever. So I'm like you. Whatever method works, and learn all you can, and that's why we're having this great discussion here today.
What I used to do, Phil, was I was a member of lots of different clubs when I was younger, and a couple of them, somebody would write an article about nymphing or buzzer fishing. And they'd have their details at the bottom. I just phone them up. I'm not very good at nymphing. Is there any chance we could have a day on the water? And I met a lot of really nice guys.
Yeah.
Most guys would be like, yeah, of course, just come
Yeah.
along. And
Well, we're looking for people to go fishing with sometimes, right? So
so this guy, Adrian Nisi, I mean,
yeah,
he must be one of the best nymph anglers I've ever come across.
yeah,
He was just, he had a sixth sense for it, but just spending 2 or 3 days in the boat with him, and I was confident that I could nymph and, get it just about right. He
yeah,
showed me all the little tricks, and there's lots of tricks to it.
yeah. And it's those little details that make all the difference. Because you think, standing back and looking at, well, I'm fishing the same line, the same flies. Why am I not having the same success as? And you've got to watch it. Maybe it's the way that, like you said, it's how they're hanging. You're dropping that method is new. Maybe it's the time they're hanging, the speed at which they raise the rod, the retrieves, their leader setup. There's so many different things that go in.
There was one, I remember fishing with Adrian one day, and he was, as usual, he was turning me inside out.
Yeah.
And I was exactly the same. He'd give me the flies. He'd show me what spacing he'd had. And I'm looking at him thinking, we're overfish. You're getting like 5 to my 1. How are you doing it? He goes, right, I know exactly what you're doing wrong. I said, well, tell me what it is. He goes, right, I'm getting my fish. So what he'd do, he'd cast out, straighten his line out so the buzzers are all straight.
Yep.
And he'd let them sink. And I could see him do nothing. He's just hanging on, keeping in touch.
Just keeping in touch, gathering the slack. Yep.
And then every now and again, he would put a long pull in. Now, what that does is it brings your buzzers up in the water, then you just stop.
Yeah.
And the buzzers would sink down, and that's when the fish were taken. But obviously, I was just eking them back. Yeah. So I'm fishing below the fish all the time.
Yeah.
But it's bringing them up and dropping them through the band of fish.
And when we fish under the indicator or bung, that's one of the techniques we do as well. It's to draw fish in, is we'll pull on it to the point our indicator or bung makes a wake. And of course, the same thing's happening. The flies are coming up and then they're settling back down again. So again, you're pulling those flies up to where the fish are, or the fish see them rise and fall and say, okay, and come over and have a look. So I thought we've talked about this paradrogue, and before we move on, because this is fun conversation. We'll be here for hours, Lindsay, but I just want to bring this in. This is the paradrogue we're talking about. For those who aren't familiar with it, it's a rectangular shape. I find they're very hard to, not difficult, but they're harder to find in North America. We tend to have the conical or sea anchor ones, the ones you don't like. But these, to me, why don't you talk a little bit about these and why you like them and what the benefits of them are?
Yeah, well, Phil, the conical drogues, I think you're as well with a plastic supermarket bag out the back of your boat. They're not holding you up. So the drogues in this country, they're generally competition legal drogues, which means they're 5 foot by 5 foot. They use guys are imperial still, I take it.
Yeah.
We're
happen. The Americans are. I'm a hybrid. In grade 7, they changed me over, and I've been confused ever since. So I speak both languages.
But 5 foot by 5 foot, so that's holding you up. Now, back in the day, I used to make my own drogues. They're not difficult to make, because the material matters. You want the drogue to sink quickly and set quickly.
Yeah.
Some materials shed water, so you don't want that as a drogue. You want something that's going to absorb water quickly. And you notice the one you've got on the screen there's got a hole in.
Yeah.
Now, it's not going to make a lot of difference, but without the hole, it's holding you up that little bit more. Now, people will say, oh, well, that's ridiculous. But when you get to a certain level in competition fishing, it's the marginal gains, I think, was the British cycle team. They've got this new fancy helmet. It's cut 0.04 seconds off their time. So if you approach fly fishing in the same way, that little hole, you're losing. However many.
The one I grabbed this off I think this is a Winchwood drogue. Sorry, Winchwood. The one I use is an older Gray's drogue. It has no hole in the middle. And when it I call it locks in, when it bites and inflates, it's amazing. Even on you're looking around and that wind seems to be blowing and you're just hardly moving at all. You just have such control and you think the drift is going to, because if you drift without one, boom, you're gone. But when you put these drogues out, you're just locked in, and
Yeah.
you're barely moving at times, and you really get to work water and work flies. It's a lot of fun. I really enjoy it.
Yeah, I can imagine full on the the duck punt
Yeah,
boats that we saw in the
yeah,
earlier picture.
yeah,
The conical drogues are probably better because they're not holding the boat. Whereas if you got a 5x5 drogue out the back of one of them and the wind gets up, you could find
yeah.
yourself in a
It
world of hurt.
depends. We've got to we do have to watch some of that, but most of our lakes aren't as big as your reservoirs, so we don't. They're small.
Okay, I
Yeah.
imagine them being
So a
large.
lot of times we can position ourselves and use the land around us to block and slow things down. So a lot of times we're not over big expanses of water. There's always exceptions. It can rock some days. As you could be in a teacup and get the hell blown out of you. So, but yeah. So now you mentioned when you attach because, and I think Tim Joyce, another YouTuber, he had a video on how to do it. He puts his two clamps on the gunnels of the boat and then runs a rope between those two clamps, and that's where you clip the ropes on. Is that how you do it?
That's how I do
Yeah.
it. But you can attach both ropes to the center. A lot of people just
Yes.
attach them to the rock
Yeah.
where the oar goes in the boat.
Yeah.
One attachment spot. That's quite effective. But what you give up then is your ability to control the drift.
Yeah.
You
I
can't.
find too, I call it the balance of the boat, and that's one of the reasons I don't like to use the conical ones. Besides the reasons you mentioned about being a shopping bag,
Yeah.
it is simply because you've got to find that balance point, and it depends on the weight of the angler, where their gear's all put, all that stuff. So the one thing I like about the paradrogues is once you chuck them out, they inflate and the boat sort of self-centers and just gets on the drift. There's not as much futzing about because that's what you've got set up in your video here. Again, we'll refer back to it.
Yeah.
The two attachment points, and you can see. I'm not sure if my mouse arrow pointer's there, but you can see before we pulled away, and I'll just grab this and back this up a bit. You can see your rope between the two clamps that you're using.
Yeah, and you'll notice the drogue set. One rope is slightly nearer. It was Reese I was fishing with that day.
Yep.
It's slightly nearer Reese, and mine's is slightly back, and that was to enable us both to get that straight line.
Yeah.
So there's no advantage. We're both fishing the same water.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's cool. So we've mentioned the other drogue. I'll just bring this in, and so these are the drift socks. That they're conical. These are what we find readily available because they're popular with the bass and walleye conventional anglers. And you can, if people are going to use one of these, I always tell them go get because they tend to be sold by, and don't hold me to this, but by the certain size of boat, they recommend the certain size of drogue. And I always tell the fly fishers, just go get the biggest one you can because that'll slow you down. But again, we talked about the attachment point, and this is what they look like as well. This is a really tiny one. This is, like you said, this is your shopping bag style, but this is a gentleman I bumped into on a lake in Oregon. But some of them you can draw. They got drawstrings that you can open and close the opening down. I tend to close it right down. And the place I use these is not all of our lakes we can get in with a boat. Sometimes we use pontoon boats like this. Some anglers don't want to buy a boat because the beauty of these boats, Lindsay, we can use them on rivers too. So some of our larger rivers, they're like a little one-man drift boat, if you will, and you can move around quite well. That's where I tend to use that conical one because it's smaller. This boat weighs next to nothing. And on certain days, small lakes that these boats are really well suited for, it works. It actually works quite well because we just mount it on the back where that's attached is where the anchor pulley goes, and we just clip it on there, and it works quite well. So we adapt.
Yeah.
All right. So let me just remove that and bring us both back in. There's some questions here as well. So, Lindsay, why don't you talk about how you deploy it? You're just throwing this out. Are there any tips you can offer anybody?
Well, I tend to, because of the way I set it up, if I'm on the drogue, which would mean I'm on the point, I would always feed the rope nearest to the guy on the engine into the water first.
Yeah.
And that would deploy it without any tangles.
Yeah.
If I'm on the engine and doing the drogue, what I tend to do is I motor the boat so that I'm facing the wind.
Yeah.
I'm
Bow
not
into it.
facing the wind. So the wind's at my back.
Okay.
I'll throw the drogue out with the wind, and then I'll turn the boat on the engine.
Yeah.
And that'll open the drogue out immediately.
Yeah.
And then you're stopped immediately. And you're
Now, do
fishing.
you ever use any extra weights? I know it's not, you mentioned in competitions it's not legal to attach anything, but if we're not competition fishing, because sometimes I remember fishing on you're not familiar, but Henry's Lake in Idaho is a famous fishery. It's a pretty large body of water, and it's very shallow. I think the deepest spot maybe 16, 18 feet deep. So when that wind gets rocking on that lake, you've got to really be careful, because that lake takes lives every year, just regardless of what you're doing, just because that lake can get really ugly really fast, because it sits in the confluence of three valleys. So those valleys to me are always fighting for who's the
And I think that's, although it sounds fantastic, you own your own boat, you go whenever you like. Our large fisheries, if the wind gets to a certain level,
they'll stop.
They just they'll either
and we should, as anglers,
you boat and get you, or they'll not let you out in the first place. And
that's good. Thing, Yeah, because they've got a liability issue, right? If they were to let somebody out.
Yeah. And they're very good, they're very good.
Yeah. So what I was saying, though, is one day we were out there, the wind was up. We were in a big boat, massive thing. And the waves at the surface would tend to keep the way they cycle at the top and roll over. It was hard to get the drogue to open initially, because the rolling waves would keep it closed. And I thought, boy, if you could just put a little bit of weight, not a lot, but just to pull that lower edge of the drogue open and let it go. Do you ever do things like that?
Well, when I'm pleasure fishing, or sometimes if it's really windy, is put carabiners on the end of my drogue.
Yeah.
Where I attach the ropes, just a carabiner on each end, that sinks it.
That's enough to get it. That's a great idea, because it doesn't have to. I'm not saying you put 12 pounds weight on.
No.
Do you ever adjust the length of your rope, whether you're fishing over shallow water or deep water, run the risk of the drogue maybe grabbing weeds if you're drifting over a really shallow spot?
No.
Okay. I don't either. My
ropes will be around 10 to 12 feet.
Yeah. That's what I did with mine. Whatever it came with, I used. So.
Yeah.
Okay. There's a couple of questions here. Maybe we can talk to them. John here. Thanks, John, for placing your comment. When fishing the drogue, how hard is it to find the right retrieval speed so you don't miss takes?
That's a good question, and it's a difficult one to answer. So, I mean, generally when we're fishing in boats, it's comfortable. You're drifting at a reasonable pace, and if you're fishing a floating line, you can actually see your line. So you know that you've got a straight line to your flies, and any fish comes near you, you're gonna catch it, because you've got a good straight line. Now the sinking lines are rather different. Now I don't know if you've heard, we've got all different kinds of profiles of lines, and so we've got sink tips. We
got all of it. Trust me, because most of the manufacturers are American now. So other than Airflow, we've got lots of lines to choose.
Yeah, calculating that's a bit different, and what I do to make sure I'm in contact, if we're going at a pace, I just strip. Yeah. Because I know if something touches my flies, I'm catching it. Yeah. If you are just doing this in a big wave, the fish will have your fly, spit it out, probably have the other one spit it out, and you would be none the wiser, because you're not in contact with your flies. Yeah,
I think that you've got to choose a method or a retrieve technique that's going to keep you.
Regardless of what kind of fishing you're doing, the key to any kind of fishing, whether it be river, stillwater, loch style, you've got to be in touch with your flies. If you're not in touch with your flies, you're not catching fish. It's that simple.
Yeah, no, and I think when the first time they see somebody loch styling go by them, if they're anchored, they see their hands going, at a much faster pace. And really, we're just staying in touch with our flies, aren't we? We're not,
exactly right.
The faster you're drifting, the more you tend to be gathering. So, So, okay. I think we got some other, drift boats are popular in North America because of the river and stream angling people do. So they'll put them on lakes. I found them, you can drift with them, but because a drift boat draws so little water because it's rockered, it's got this curvature in the bottom of their hull so they can navigate down a river and around rocks and all that kind of stuff. It makes them really susceptible to wind on lakes. So it's, on a lake, you can, if you're stalking fish, I've actually been on lakes like Hebgen in Montana, where we would use the drift boat to get in really skinny water because it drew so little that there was browns and rainbows in there hunting, feeding in there on damsel and mayfly nymphs.
Yeah.
But to drift with them, that boat was so hard to control because as soon as the wind comes up, it's got these high sides and it's a big, it just weathercocks all over the place. So,
I actually had a go in a drift boat last year, and for the river,
yes,
they're perfect.
Oh, that's what they're designed for.
The guy had a barbecue in the boat, which I was really impressed with.
Oh yeah,
but, brilliant for that purpose. For loch style fishing, you're biting with death, I think.
Yeah. Thanks, Mike, for the compliment. Michael, for the compliment. I guess that's always nice to hear. Clint's got another great question. Clint's got a great question here. Would you recommend the roly-poly over a strip retrieve?
I'll tell you what, they're two different things, Clint. So when you're stripping, if you can imagine, you're stripping away. Every time you've reached the extent of your stripping, it can be short or it could be a long strip. When you stop, that's very often when the take will come. You've stopped the fly dead, and you might think, oh no, I'm stripping really fast. You're not stripping faster than a fish is tracking your fly. So when you stop, that's when they're taking it. Or very much, you've stopped, you've come for the next strip, bang, and that's when you'll get a fish. And sometimes that is super effective. Yeah. Other times, the fish want a continuous retrieve. And the only way of achieving that is roly-polying.
Yeah.
And that can be lethal as well. It depends on the day, but either one of the methods would work, and it can be devastating.
Okay. We got a good question from here. There are many methods of flying used on both sides of the pond. Whatever method used, as long as they are legal in water at any time, they work. Most importantly, afflict minimum stress. I think we all agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And Michael, this question is actually unique. Are the fish in your waters more naturalized in the UK where regular stocking occurs? Is that?
That's a tough question. So in Scotland, we've still got hill lochs and wild fisheries, and Wales is the same. In England, we tend to have stocked fisheries. I don't know of any wild places in England that I could go and fish.
We're the same here because many of our better trout lakes out west are very shallow and productive, and there's no rivers coming in or out of the lake for the trout to spawn because they can't spawn in the lake.
We do have wild fish.
Yeah, we do too. But our best fisheries are stocked. But it depends on the state of the province and what their practices are. A lot of like some of ours in Canada, they'll stock them at a catchable size once or twice a year, and that's it, and just let them grow on. Sometimes they'll stock. Each lake has a different, and each state and province is different with their management practices and what their philosophies are towards that, and whether they're stocking lakes for catch and release purposes or they're stocking lakes so you can take some home for dinner with you. They use different practices, different fish, so they're all a little different. But most of ours, I think the term you use over there is grow on. They'll stock them small, and some of our productive lakes, we've got growth rates over 2 pounds a year with the freshwater the scuds that they feed on here, the freshwater shrimp, and they can get large, and they get pretty wily because catch and release is sort of the accepted practice over here.
Yeah, so on some of the bigger angling water reservoirs, in fact, all the reservoirs, some of the stock fish will survive a lot. So Rutland, for example, they stock a lot of brown trout, and they're great at first. You catch lots of them, but then probably towards the middle of May, they just disappear, and you wonder where they've gone, and they've gone deep. And people still can catch them, but they go out specifically to target these bigger fish, and some of them grow on hugely and become, they become naturalized I suppose.
Yeah.
But they were all stocked fish at the start, is what I would say.
That's same with our waters and different practices as well. And what I'd like to do now, we'll just answer one more question, then we're going to slip over to bank angling because I get a lot of questions about bank fishing, and I know over there, Lindsay, you do a lot of that as well. You mentioned that you can get a day ticket and just go fishing on the bank. But Steve, a good friend of mine who comes with me on a number of trips, use multiple flies when drifting.
Yeah, well, absolutely. Very rarely will I use one fly in a boat. If it's the only time I would do that actually is if the weather conditions dictate that I'll only be able to control one fly on my drift.
Yeah.
Or it's very, very cold and the fish are sitting hard on the bottom, I would use one fly.
Yeah.
But all the rest of the time, I'm using around a 22-foot leader. There'll be 10 foot of tippet to my first fly, and then there'll be sort of 4 to 5 feet to my other 3 flies. So I would have 4 flies on my cast.
Okay, and you're using all level. I know level leaders are very popular there. We're using the same diameter all the way across, and you're tying them off independent droppers, because I know in a lot of our North American rivers, for example, it's common to tie to the bend of the fly, and I like you, I like to fish on independent droppers. So the flies can move freely. I can change them. I find it a lot more versatile to fish that way.
So I use a surgeon's knot, and I start off with 10 to 12 inches of tippet, and then that allows me to change flies, until I find the fly that's going to do the job for me, if you like.
Okay. Do you have we'll touch briefly on flies. Do you have a sort of a starting lineup you like to put out there, or are you, more paying attention to the conditions, what the fisheries, the bailiffs or whatever have, what the fisheries recommending?
I think I'm a kind of, because I've been doing it for so long, I'm a kind of time of year guy.
Yeah.
So if I turn up in April or late March to fish, I'll have an orange blob on a top dropper. Then 10 feet behind it, I'll have a black blob. And that will be kind of my starting cast. Because at the start of the season, all the fisheries are heavily stocked. And there's very little more effective than a couple of blobs pulled at high speed on a fast line, Down the line, if I was to go fishing middle of April, I'd probably have 4 super glue buzzers on.
Yeah.
Because the fish are really switched on to the buzzers. And I know which one I prefer, because that pulling blobs is hard work.
It's tiring. It either works or it's like I need to slow down and change a little bit. And for our viewers out there that don't know, a buzzer is a chironomid or a midge in North America. They may not be familiar with that term.
Yeah, we say buzzer in this country because we can't say chironomid.
Yeah. Well, I know where they come from, because when the hatch is strong, the noise of the flying adults is buzzing noise is almost deafening at times. So.
I mean, when the buzzers are on, the sport here, it's
the same here.
You like it?
Yeah, it's addictive. It's like the only way. It's such a fun, we love it.
Dry flies, I can't think of a more pleasant way of catching fish than fishing a buzzer. So,
Lindsay, let's talk about. We're just coming under an hour, so we won't be too much longer. But let's touch on bank fishing a little bit, because here in North America, it's not always possible. We've got private land issues. The bottom of the lake is very muddy, so if you step into it, you're like up to your armpits in mud. You've got trees behind you. But I know in a lot of your fisheries, and I've seen on your videos, your smaller fisheries, they're manicured in such a way that you can fish from the bank, and I don't get to do it enough, and when I do get to do it, it's a lot of fun. A lot of the reservoirs I fished in the States, you can fish from the bank because they're wide open. The bottom's firm enough. If you want to get in a little bit, you can walk on. It's just practically you can do it. But maybe you could offer some of our viewers some tips on how you like to fish from the bank and things like that.
Well, as you say, Phil, it's a completely different setup, really. So a wild fishery, I wouldn't know how to approach it, to be perfectly honest. I mean, the nearest I could come to that is fishing a large reservoir.
They're very similar from what I've seen some of the reservoir fishing you've done from Rutland and
Yeah.
Chew and Blagden and places like that.
I
Very
rarely
similar.
fish the bank there, Phil.
Yeah,
Rarely,
well,
very,
if
rarely.
you
But
can in those fisheries, but
the
you know,
smaller fisheries, what I would say, what I've learned from stillwater fishing, and I would say out of the three fly fishing disciplines, which is stillwater, river, and loch styling, stillwater's probably my least favourite. I enjoy doing it infrequently, but I do enjoy it when I go. But the biggest mistake I see is approach. And what I mean by that is, the guys in the car parks, they've rigged up their kit, they've run straight up to the very edge of the bank, and then they're trying to throw the whole fly line right out across the lake. And I just think, oh man, any fish that were just in at the side, and there'll be lots of fish cruising the margins, looking for an easy meal, a terrestrial, falling off the bank into the edge, and before you've even started, them fish are off the menu because you're up there thrashing the water to a foam, trying to throw the biggest length of fly line you can out on the Stillwater. What I always do is start well back. So I'd maybe be 10 feet from the edge of the bank, and I'll just plonk my flies in at the margins, make sure I cover as much water as I can from there, and then I would slowly make my way towards the edge of the bank, and then I would work the water in a fan cast, but covering each distance until I eventually started throwing my fly line further out. So approach is the main thing. Don't be too hasty when you get to these still waters, because very often the fish will be right at your feet.
Oh, I know. I've had the good fortune to go down to Argentina a couple of times, and Jurassic Lake. You fish there, you don't want to, like, that lake gets so windy. You'd for sure kill yourself if you're out in a boat, and the fish are literally, you could almost stab them with the rod tip. They're so close to the shore, right? And left undisturbed, you have a good chance of hooking them. Otherwise,
depends on the time of year and the environment as well. There's reservoirs in Wales where the heather flies come on the water, and it's just absolutely carnage. I've yet to experience that. I've got a friend who's promised to give me a shout and take me up, but I'd like to do that.
So what lines, do you have any preferred lines you're using when you're bank fishing? If you were to have, 2 or 3 you'd recommend where you tend to fish most often, or you got the whole suite with you?
No, so when I'm bank fishing, I tend to have a floater and an intermediate, and I think the fisheries I'm fishing, the smaller fisheries, you can get away with just them 2 lines. If you're a hardcore winter angler, I would suggest you'd need something a bit quicker. But an intermediate which sinks at about 2.5 inches per second, it's more than enough. The other thing you've got to remember when you're bank fishing is you've got all day to let them flies sink. So as opposed to loch style fishing where you've not got much time because you're drifting on the bank, if I throw my team of buzzers out, I can sit and wait.
Yeah, it's like fishing from an anchored boat. You're not. You've got
they've
all the
reached
time in the
natural
world.
descent, and I've got all day to play with that. So 2 lines really for the bank fishing. I don't see much requirement for more than that, to be honest.
And you just So when you're casting, because a question I get asked, obviously from a bank, is not sure the depth of water out there. Are you just, I tend to experiment. I'll cast out maybe 5 seconds down, 10, that kind of thing. Are you doing the same kind of thing, experimenting to find the feeding depth?
Well, a lot. I mean, it pays to just ask the fishery manager. They built that pond. A lot of the fisheries here, the manager's got a digger, and they know what depth their pond is.
Well, we don't have that. We got to guess sometimes. A lot of times.
I fish at Manningford, Albury Estates, and these people, they're so knowledgeable about their fisheries. They could just point to a bit of water and go, well, that's 6 feet, or you need to lengthen your dropper there because that's 7 feet, or whatever. But I always ask. I mean, you don't need to. A trick I used to use, I don't do it anymore actually because I'm not that worried about catching fish anymore. But when I was doing the competition fishing, I would have these tape measures that you could run out. They were big, like for measuring landscape plots, if you like. I would have a sea fishing weight attached to it, and at the boat I would drop it over the edge, and I knew when I got to that 10 10 to 12 feet of water,
Yeah.
I was in fish country.
Yeah.
So I would wind it in. And on big reservoirs, that was a way of doing it with the weights. And then, of course, electronics came along and you could see the depth of the fish finders and stuff. Not
Yeah.
sure how accurate they were in the early days. I did
Yeah.
buy them, and
No,
I found it of great use for that primarily. Depth of water, temperature of water. I mean, the fact that it's supposed to find fish, not so much.
No, I I'm gonna not lie. I use electronics all the time on our waters, but fish finding is just one thing they do. It's more valuable for finding depth and different bottom types and weeds and things like that. You find the right places. The fish are typically there. It's an interesting tool to, and I've done a sounder present. I should probably have a friend of mine who sells them as a representative, and he really knows them and really shows how to use them. And fish finding is not, it's a component of it, but it's generally in deeper water, and that's not always good fly water. So
I've been predator fishing a couple of times for pike and zander, and the predator anglers swear by them. You've got to have them. It's like an essential part of the kit.
Yeah. Well, it's sort of become that way here too, Lindsay. But used properly, I think people just it finds fish, and that's I rarely use it for that. If I happen to, I trust it more in deeper water than I do in shallow water, because just the way they work, that little cone that comes out of the transducer, it's only it could only be
a lot better than when I had one. I think mine was called a Fishing Buddy 5500 or something.
Yeah, I don't even think. Yeah, mine's a little. I've got what they call a Humminbird Helix 7 with mapping, and it'll actually draw underwater contour maps. It keeps you busy when the fishing's slow. It's like having Netflix or something.
Can you get Netflix on that?
You get Netflix, Amazon Prime. Yeah, I can get my English football matches that I like to watch, so that's good too. Okay, last question on the banks. And do you prefer to fish with the wind at your back or off your side, or fish into the wind? Obviously, assuming it's not gale force. Do you have any? You're standing, choosing what helps you determine likely areas you're going to target first and second and kind of things.
Well, I'll be honest with you, Phil. I prefer to fish with the wind at my back.
Yes.
Because obviously it's comfortable.
Yes.
But I'll also be honest with you, it's very lazy.
Yeah.
If the wind's blowing onto a bank and it's been blowing that way predominantly for a few days, take a guess where all the food is.
Yeah.
So, very often if you go and you're brave enough to, especially in the winter months, that wind cuts through you. It may be just an old man thing, but it cuts through you. But if you want to catch fish and you can get your fly line out into the wind, you don't have to cast very far often, because all that food has been blown onto that bank, and then that's where the fish are, where the food are. Yeah. Now, the only time that's different is if it's been really windy and there's a huge undertow bringing the fish back.
Yeah.
Sorry, bringing the
food it cycles back. It back under, right? Yeah.
But the size of waters I'm fishing, that's very rare.
Yeah. No, we've got some. I fished a couple in Colorado that were big water, and we fished them from the shore, and it was a lot of fun, because most of my fishing tends to be in a boat because of the reasons I mentioned earlier. It's just not practical. But we all, tend to target the shoreline areas anyway. It was funny. I've got a friend of mine who's a guide, a river and stream guide, and he says, we're drifting one day in the drift boat going down. It was on the Bow River in Calgary, and he says, we're funny because when we're in the boat, we're all cast into the bank. Yet all the bank anglers are casting to the middle where the boats are. We're never happy. We're
it's always better
somewhere over the rainbow.
Yeah, there's a quite a famous casting instructor in this country. His name's Hal Morgan.
Yes, I know Hal. Yes,
he was a world champion, and I remember going to see one of his demonstrations, and that boy can throw a fly line like to the moon, and that's what he said. He says, boat anglers are trying to hit the bank, and the bank anglers are trying to hit the boat anglers.
Yeah.
And he says very often the fish are gone because there's that much carnage going on between the two.
They're not going to tolerate that. So, well, Lindsay, this has been great. We're just over an hour, and I said I didn't want to take you away because you're probably getting close to dinner time over there.
It's past. My family's probably eating.
Oh, yeah, you get leftovers.
Mine will be in the dog.
Yeah. So how can people, who we've just met you for the I haven't, but they've met you for the first time. How can they follow you? Like, you've got a pretty active YouTube channel with both fishing videos, fly fishing videos, and tying videos. How can they get in touch with you?
Yeah, well, if you just type Lindsay Simpson into the search bar, I'm
Yeah.
the only bloke. You know, the rest of the Lindsay Simpsons are women and they're scantily dressed. So please click on the guy with the blue shirt.
You never know; they might get lost and never find you again. And your YouTube channel, it's
Lindsay Simpson fly fishes, I think. Sorry, I'm not
yeah,
quite sure.
yeah. Oh, not that one, not that one. I can actually put that up. I'll see if I can create a one here. So it's just
Yeah,
Lindsay
should really know the name
Simpson.
of it.
Yeah, where I spell. So Lindsay Simpson fly fishing on. I can't spell here. Hold on. There we go. So that's we can just have that. So that's what they're looking for. I spelt that right? Yes, good. And you do Facebook and Instagram as well.
Yeah, Facebook,
I,
Instagram. I recently started Twitter, but I've got no idea what that's all about. I just keep
yeah,
posting photographs and
I do the Instagram, and I think I actually spelt fishing wrong. No, I still got it wrong. Look at me, monkey with a searchlight, as my kid says when I'm using the television remote. Flishing. What is fishing? There we go. I think I got it right. So again, we'll get that on there. Lindsay Simpson fly fishing. There we go.
yeah.
I still got
I'm
it
not, I'm
wrong.
not,
What is?
I'm not hard to find.
Yeah,
Well, I've got to say I'm fairly easy to find on YouTube
yeah.
and Facebook.
Okay, that's good. Well, Lindsay, I want to thank you for spending time today. Hopefully, everybody enjoyed that. I got a little more insight into loch style in particular, and the methods you use over there in the UK. And I think my goal here was to sort of show everyone how applicable they are to our North American waters here, and encourage people to try them out. And it certainly adds to your, if you're an anchor fisherman, I encourage you to try the loch style, because I think you'll be pleasantly surprised how well it works and how applicable it is. And maybe, Lindsay, in the near future, we can have you over here and get you play on some of our waters. I think you'd have some fun.
Yeah, I
Of course,
think my wife would have a hissy fit if I have another trip booked.
well then, watch out. I could be on your doorstep on Tuesday. So, because one of my, I want to get back. I immigrated when I was 7, and unfortunately I haven't been back. I'd love to go fish, Rutland and all those.
Yeah, well, we've got some amazing venues. We really
Yeah.
have. We're very lucky.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I think you've probably got the natural world more on your doorstep than we have.
Yeah,
here.
we are a little spoiled. I can be 15 minutes out of town and I'm in the middle of nowhere, and
Yeah.
our
sounds like
Yeah.
bliss.
yeah, it's tough. But the one thing we pay for that is winter. So you are like today in Celsius, we are cold,
Oh,
and
right.
we won't be fishing until I'm just looking at my we won't be fishing here probably in my neck of the woods until mid-April, late April, if the ice comes off. Yeah.
I've got a very good friend actually that moved to Norway, and I don't know how he does it, because he was angling mad, but they only get to fish for about 4 months of the year. I fish all year round. I start climbing the walls a little bit if I can't get out fishing.
Well, I do things like this and tie flies, and I do get to. I've already managed to sneak out to. When I was down in the States, I fished Pyramid Lake, which from shore, which is a unique fishery. You fish off ladders. It's interesting for a huge cutthroat in there, 10, 15-pound fish. So it's pretty incredible fishery there as well. So
yeah.
Anyway, Darren says now he's got to go buy a drogue. Yes, you do. Yes, you do. They're not that expensive, and they last forever. Right, so
well, you can make one.
Yeah.
They're simple.
Yeah. So, all right, Lindsay, and thanks everyone. To those questions we didn't have a chance to answer, I think we got to all of them. I'll certainly have a look, and I can answer them as well. This is both visible as a recording on my not my Instagram, no, on my YouTube channel. Sorry, we'll get one of my social things confused here, and my Phil Rowley Fly Fishing Facebook page. So if you didn't get a chance to see all of it or whatever, you want to watch it again, it'll be there for you to watch in perpetuity as long as those two platforms don't disappear overnight. We'll be good. So again, Lindsay, thanks so much for
You're welcome.
joining and spending your evening and with me. And we'll see you on the next Lake Talk Live. Everybody get out there and catch some fish, or if you can't, tie a bunch of flies.